Welcome to Turbulent Flow, the video vlog where this 50-something-year-old mechanical engineer, circus performer, recreational, and two-time breast cancer adventurer alumni. I don't like the survivor, just makes me feel awkward. Anyways, two-time breast cancer alumnus turns on the camera and just starts rambling for however long it's going to take. I made a promise when I started posting these just before my double mastectomy in December of 2025. I promised myself that I would just make these and not edit them in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to keep to that today. But I am going to try and speak a little more carefully than I usually do. Usually it's just me completely rambling freeform. But today is a day that I'm going to basically, here's the content warning. I'm going to talk about weight loss, I'm going to talk about diet, and I'm going to talk about my own experiences in that particular field. Now, if you've been watching this vlog, you are going to see a person who looks like she is the size that I am currently. I'm not going to, I'm fit, and by most measures, I would be described as slim, skinny, especially, goodness, now that I don't have any boobs. They took them off 6 months ago. So now that I don't have any breasts, I'm going to admit, wow, from a physical presentation standpoint, it actually made me look more slim than I currently am. But for anyone who's known me for a longer period of time, this, right now I am within the range of what, the charts would say is a healthy weight for my size, for my height. I'm 5'4". And that says that, officially I'm supposed to be between 120 and 129 pounds. Regardless, that isn't what I wanted to talk about. I've been outside of that range for most of my adult life. Like many women, eating was not something that I wanted to be focused on. It wasn't something I wanted to build my entire life around. I am gonna be honest and say that I grew up with a parent, my mom, who was constantly on a diet. And that gave me the impression that being an adult and being a female adult in our society meant always being on a diet. And that was not something that I wanted for myself. But at the same time, I also live in this society. I see what is being presented to us as, the ideal, body shape and size. And I was not immune to that. And so basically that led to a mindset where I was constantly unhappy with myself. I would gain weight and I wouldn't, like how my body looked. But at the same time, then I'd sit there and beat myself up inside my own head, because I was lazy and I didn't, I just wasn't doing it right and I wasn't putting enough effort in. And then sometimes especially in my late 20s and through my 30s, There were some times where I would lose weight. I went to Weight Watchers and did all of that. I would lose weight, and it would work, and I would feel really good, and buy all these new clothes. And then slowly over the years, when I wasn't paying such vigorous attention to what I was eating, it would slowly creep up. And then I would go on a diet and I would lose some weight, and yay, that would happen. And then I would let off the gas because it's exhausting being on a diet all the time. And then it would slowly creep up. In my 40s, I decided that wasn't working for me. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life beating myself up. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life disliking myself and feeling unhappy with myself. And as I had a young child at the time who is now growing into a teenager, I did not want my kid to grow up seeing a mom who was always on a diet. That wasn't what I wanted to project as the example for my kid. So I started rethinking how I was going to approach food in my life, and a lot of it sort of was initially, stemmed from the place of just wanting to set the not correct, there is no correct in parenting. I just wanted to set an example that I felt kept to the values that I wanted to instill in my child. So what I did was I started exercising more. When I was 42, I took my first aerial circus class and absolutely fell in love with that particular form of fitness and artistry, and that has kind of really given me a place to hang my hat over the years. But even before that, I tried running. Running was actually the way that I completely was able to stop smoking, and I'm really grateful that I found it, because every time I would go for a run, because I was a casual smoker through my 20s, weekends, hanging out at the bar with your friends. It was a fairly common thing in the 1990s, and I was not immune to it. So when I really became determined to give that up, unsurprisingly, around the time that I started thinking about having a child, I took up running, and I also took up rock climbing, thanks to a good friend who was interested one New Year's Eve in learning how to rock climb. And so she and I, we took our first rock climbing lesson together. So I started doing that. This was kind of my late 30s, mid to late 30s. So I was slowly looking for things to become more active in, to get exercise. And so for me, rock climbing was one of them. Maybe my dog will stop barking. Rock climbing was one of them. Running, jogging. I was never a fast runner. Was another one. Like I said, but I noticed that it really helped with the mental side of trying to quit smoking. So that's where I started making a connection between exercise and my mental health. And slowly over time, I started to recognize that pattern. So when I started looking again at, okay, how do I want to set an example for my kid when it comes to food, I realized that what I really wanted to do was focus on how it made me feel. How does food make me feel? How does what I eat affect my energy levels? How does what I eat affect my mental health? And I started to build from that base, instead of that base that I had previously gone to, of like basically buckling down and essentially going to war with myself and my own urges, telling myself, no, you can't have that. It's not allowed. So that was a big shift the first time that I did that. The first time I was like, okay, yeah, I'm just going to focus on how it makes me feel. How does food make me feel? How does it combine with the exercise that I'm doing? How does that make me feel? And that worked really, really well. I was genuinely surprised. And it was nice to live in a body and start living a life where I wasn't always beating myself up, where I wasn't hating myself. And that's actually where I started this idea of the 28-day, I think I talked a few videos ago about the 28-day, change your life workout that I found. I combined that with healthier eating, and now over 10 years later, I have a body that's very strong, that I'm really quite happy with. But the reason why I'm revisiting this topic is because, like many people, COVID was pretty hard on my healthy eating patterns and ideas. It threw a wrench into kind of all of life, and so my weight crept back up to a point where I basically was 30 pounds over that healthy weight range. And at the time I was like, you know what, that's fine, it's okay, I have a body, I'm strong. Like I was still doing circus, I was still very fit. I just had a weight that was higher than the chart said that it should be, and I was okay with that. I was actually really proud of the fact that I had this larger body. It meant that I was extra strong, that I could climb silks, and that I could do the tricks that I could do with a larger body. I was like, you know what, this is fine, this is good. It turns out my body had other opinions on the matter, though, because genetically I have high blood pressure, and this started to become an issue in my late 20s. As I started to gain, slowly gain weight, my blood pressure also started to creep up. So in my late 20s, they put me on medication. I started taking medication for my blood pressure. But the thing that I've discovered over the decades since I started taking blood pressure medication is that, the more my weight creeps up, the more my blood pressure creeps up. So as those extra 30 pounds came on, thanks to COVID, and I was fit, I was exercising, so it had nothing to do with whether or not I was leading a healthy, active lifestyle. My blood pressure was still starting to creep up, and it got to a point where the doctor wanted to put me on a second blood pressure medication because it had crept up along with my weight. And that was a wake-up call for me personally. It combined timing-wise with my first breast cancer diagnosis and treatment. So, we didn't really talk much about my blood pressure while I was going through treatment. That was the first time was a lumpectomy followed by radiation. But after I had recovered from all of that and was seeing my general practitioner, she was like, yeah, your blood pressure is still going up. She'd been keeping an eye on it along with the breast cancer. So my blood pressure had been creeping up, and my weight had been creeping up. And she was like, yeah, you're it's time to put you on a second medication. We gotta get your blood pressure back down. This is, this isn't an urgent, crazy, super, move fast thing like cancer is, but it's insidious, and it creeps, and it does create problems over time. So I need to do something about it. So at that point, I, realized that I needed to pay some very close attention to what I was eating, because obviously, my fit, active, exercise schedule wasn't doing enough to keep my body healthy in the way that it needed to be. So I went on a diet. It was not a beat myself up kind of diet. I started tracking what I was eating, and I started weighing myself every day and just recording those numbers. But over time, as I started, writing down what I was eating and paying attention to what I was eating and how it made me feel, slowly over time, I was able to lose that weight that had caused my blood pressure to creep up. Now that process took a year. It took over a year. It took over a year to lose 30 pounds. So it was in no way, shape, or form a fast diet. But every step along the way, when I was doing it, I was trying to make choices that I felt I would be able to maintain for the rest of my life, because I realized that if I didn't maintain them for the rest of my life, we'd be back in the same pattern that we'd been before, where things would start creeping up, and then my blood pressure would start creeping up, and we'd be doing this cycle again. So by the time I started this vlog series, I had finished losing all of the weight, and was had been in maintenance basically for about a year. I think I'd been no, that's not true. I'd been in maintenance for about half a year when I got my second breast cancer diagnosis. So that's the size body that you've seen along in these videos. It's within the tolerance bars, of what the medical establishment, or the charts anyways, say is healthy. I mean, I'm a healthy weight. I'm a healthy weight, the size you're looking at now, and I still take blood pressure medication. That's the important thing that I wanted to sort of center this discussion around. I have a body that is not healthy at larger sizes, and over the course of the last 6 months, since I had my second breast cancer surgery and I had my double mastectomy, unsurprisingly, my weight has started to creep up. It hasn't shot up, but it has started to creep up. It's now at the top of that range that the charts say where it should be, whereas before it was in the lower half of the range. Now it's up the top half of the range. So we're not talking about a big shift in size. Certainly nothing that aesthetically I give a crap about. Like, my body is still very strong. All my clothes fit. That's not the concern. The concern was that I pulled out my handy blood pressure monitor earlier today, and yeah, guess what is creeping back up? So yeah, I'm back to a place where the top of this range is not healthy for my body, and I need to start actually, paying closer attention. and that's to be expected. These things are going to be kind of like a slinky, especially as I was recovering and as I was trying to build my muscles back up after the surgery. I knew that I needed extra calories. I needed to not be actually sort of paying close attention to what I was eating, because it was important that I was fueling myself so that I could build my muscles back and so that my body could recover from the surgery that I had had. And those things totally worked. And it was great. I feel really good. Things have recovered very healthily. I'm really, really happy with that. But now it's time to get those blood pressure numbers back down to where that single medication that I take is actually able to do the job sufficiently. So that means, the slow process back to basically just writing down what it is that I'm eating, paying attention to my portion sizes, because I like food. I like to eat a lot of food. I'm not gonna lie, food is delicious, and I really, really love it. So it turns out that I can't eat as much food as I would like. So I'm gonna focus on eating things that are really delicious, that make me feel really good in my body. That happily, it's summer, so there's so many fresh vegetables and fresh fruits that are available. I'm going to concentrate on that. I'm going to concentrate on drinking lots of water, probably drinking a few less cocktails, and less bread, and then see where that goes. So that's not something I like to talk about very often with people, because it's just, I know it's a sensitive subject for so many people. I know how many decades I spent beating myself up and saying negative things toward myself, and I don't pretend that I have all of the answers. I found slowly answers that worked for me, and I'm really happy with that. And so that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it, but talk about it someday. Anna is going to stop barking, I swear. But she's like, no, I'm not. You're talking, I'm talking. Anyways, but just to kind of wrap that up, it's why I wanted to be a little more careful in how I was speaking about this subject. It's not something that I talk about very often or very openly, because as I said, I recognize that this is an incredibly challenging subject for so many people, but I did want to address it because it is an important part of my life, because as I said, anybody that is looking at me on a video is going to see somebody that looks like she's existing in this very traditional aerialist body. And I wanted to provide a little bit of background on how I got here and why I did it. It wasn't because it turns out that the motivation of aesthetics, and just the looking slim piece of it was never enough for me. The beating myself up was never enough. That did not work. I tried that for decades, and I could never stay there because it didn't work for me. My brain does not enjoy feeling shitty and saying bad things to itself. The thing that made the difference for my own self is the focus on my own health, the connection between my blood pressure and my personal physical size, and then that combined with the wanting to set the best example that I can for my own teenager, who's growing up in this society, and to hopefully show her that there's a way to, you know, work on having a healthy body without saying bad things to yourself, without beating yourself up, without that self-recrimination that I lived with for so many years, and that I see so many other people, you know, live with and continue to struggle with. Yeah. So that's a little deep, and it's probably not something I'm going to talk about too often, but I might give some updates on how things are going. So if you see some, you know, some shifts over the next, you know, this is probably going to take months. You know, I'm only talking about like 5 or 6 pounds that need to shift in my body at this particular moment. So I don't know whether that'll be visible on a camera or not, but I did want to explain what was happening and why it was happening, so that, you know, if it is something that I want to talk about, you know where that's coming from. Whew. Yeah. Deep stuff today. That doesn't seem like me. So I hope here in Canada, today is the day before our Canada Day celebrations. So hopefully, if you're a fellow Canuck, you have something fun planned for the holiday. And if not, I hope the weekend gets here soon for you, and that you have something fun planned for then. All right? Have a good day. Bye.